In today's note, we're going to be looking at factors that affect populations. So, various combinations of abiotic or non-living and biotic or living factors can cause populations to increase or decrease. So, populations can grow due to two things. Overall, the natality or birth rate, so how many individuals are being born and how fast, and immigration or the amount of individuals moving into an area. The populations can then decrease due to basically the opposite. The mortality or the death rate, or how fast individuals are dying, as well as emigration, which is moving out of an area. So overall, a population growth can be kind of written down as an equation of basically the births plus immigration minus the deaths plus emigration. So basically, the amount of individuals increasing minus the amount of individuals decreasing is going to equal your overall growth. If you have more increase than decrease, your population is going to be growing. But if you have more decrease than an increase, your population is going to be declining. And basically, the birth rate and the death rate tend to have the greatest effect on population size. So that means that the largest population, or the largest factors in terms of if a population is going to grow or not, is how fast the birth rate or death rate are. As well, for populations, there's two types of populations that you can look at. We have open populations. So open populations allow for births, deaths, immigration, and emigration to occur. So an example like this would be a forest, a lake, a field, any of the biomes that we've looked at in previous lessons. But basically all four types of growth or decline can occur. The other type of population is a closed population. So these closed populations do not allow for individuals to move in or out of an area. So an example might be a fenced yard, game reserves, or lab settings. The map here you can see is of game reserves in Africa. So you can see them highlighted in brown. So basically they control what animals can go in or what go out of these areas to help preserve their kind of, or limit what the populations are, or to protect them. So again, births and deaths can occur here, but they have limited space and or resources because it's kind of a closed area, and individuals cannot enter or exit the population. So as an example, if there is an unlimited amount of food, water, and space in a rabbit population, or there is, without any limits, 10 breeding pairs of rabbits could expand to 10 million breeding pairs in only 3 years. So what effects might this have on other populations? And you can see kind of a small food chain here with the grass, then the rabbit, then the flea. So looking at, or trying to think about what effects could this 10 million breeding pairs of rabbits have on other populations? And if you think about it, what you could find is that, similar to the food chain gizmo that we did in the past or in a previous lesson, right, the 10 million breeding pairs of rabbits would consume a lot of the grass, if not all of it, which would cause the grass population to decline. The large number of rabbits would allow the flea population to increase because there's a lot more rabbits for them to feed on. As well, this could then have a negative effect because once all the grass dies out, the rabbits would not have any more food to eat, so they would start to die out, and then the fleas the same thing, and it would just kind of be this continuous up and down. Again, similar to what we would have seen in that gizmo. So what we're looking at are limiting factors. So in a healthy functioning ecosystem, limiting factors prevent overpopulation. So we're not having 10 million rabbits in 3 years. We're not seeing that because of these limiting factors. And limiting factors are basically any factor that restricts population or limits the population. There are abiotic and biotic limiting factors. So in this case, biotic or non-living limiting factors can include the amount of light. So again, for plants, they need light to grow. So the amount of light available to them, that's a non-living factor. Temperature, so hot temperatures, cold temperatures, Some may be beneficial for certain species, some may not. That can affect the population. Acidity, so the acidity of soil or in the water can affect how much or how many individuals can thrive in a certain area. Natural disasters, storms, fires, or droughts can affect the population sizes. So you think of like forest fires, those obviously can affect the population. It could wipe out a population, it can reduce it. Storms, tornadoes, hurricanes, anything like that, snowstorms, ice storms can affect that. Droughts, so lack of water. You think of the stuff that's happening in California with the droughts and the fires, or the fires in Australia and all of the populations that are disrupted there. And then finally, human disturbances. So human disturbances, not humans specifically, but looking at things of maybe, say, construction or buildings blocking lights, right? Or adding pollution, which affects temperature or acidity. Human interactions or disturbances can cause storms or fires as well. New buildings, subdivisions, construction can affect populations also. So what we're going to look at here is just kind of a small video of baby penguins struggling to survive. A little bit sad, but you don't see anything. You don't see any dead penguins, I guess, so to speak. If you want to skip ahead, you can, but it's not graphic or anything. You just might be a little bit upset because they're baby penguins. But it's looking at the abiotic factors, and keep in mind this happens naturally. This is not humans aren't interfering with any of this or whatnot.
Reunited at last. The mother sees her chick for the first time. She's keen to start parenting, but the father needs persuading to surrender the chick he's been caring for all winter. He must now put his chick at risk. In these temperatures, it could freeze in seconds. The male will have to let go. Eventually, the transfer to the mother is safely made. The chicks grow quickly on a diet of fish and squid. Soon they're keen to explore, but always with mother in tow. This chick is less fortunate. Its mother has not returned to claim it. Another orphan is searching for a new family, but this female already has a chick of her own. Some orphans receive too much mothering from penguins whose own chicks have not survived. The urge to parent is so strong that they will compete with one another to adopt any chick they find. Many of these squabbles end in tragedy, as the poor chick is trampled to death. Those chicks that do have parents quickly learn survival skills. Even in spring, they must huddle together for warmth, just as their fathers did in the depths of winter. A group of chicks has got lost in the blizzard. Cold and disorientated, they search for the colony. It will not be long before the storm claims its first victims. By early summer, the chicks are surprisingly well developed and now look ready to take on the world. Those that survive their first year have the best possible start in life, thanks to the extraordinary hardships endured by their parents. Parents who battled with the Antarctic winter and won.
So again, while that may be a little bit upsetting or depressing, keep in mind that it's nature. It's happening all the time, and you have to think that this is the natural way to limit the population. If the penguin population didn't have these limiting factors, then you don't know what could happen. There could be fights or competition for resources, because if all the penguins survive, then there's going to be more penguins fighting for fish, and then if they can't get the fish and they have to get food from somewhere else, they may turn on other penguins. There's actually a Futurama, if you have ever watched that, there's a Futurama episode about the penguin population exploding rapidly, and they end up just turning on each other because there's not enough resources naturally for them, so they have to find other different ways. But aside from abiotic factors, there are also biotic limiting factors. So these are living limiting factors, and there's going to be 3 of them we're going to look at. So competition is one. So basically 2 species vie for the same resource. So whether it's 2 species fighting for the same food resource or the same kind of like land resource or space, that's competition. We have predation, so where one species feeds on another, so the predator and prey relationship. This is a very common one. And finally, symbiosis, so this is where 2 species live near each other. So there's multiple forms of symbiosis where both species benefit, or one species benefits and the other is harmed, or one species benefits and another one just there's no effect. But again, we're just looking at the idea in general. We're not going to go into the specifics. So here is an example of competition. So these are Darwin finches, basically on an island in the Galapagos. All these finches exist, and the idea is that they all kind of came or evolved or adapted from a kind of one family or one type of finch. But because they're on an island, the amount of resources are limited, so the ones that could adapt to eating different food would survive. That's why you have all these finches that are all very similar, but they eat different foods. So you have some that are seed eaters, insect eaters, fruit eaters, and cactus eaters, but they all are supposed to have evolved from the same kind of general species, and they branched out because there was so much competition for the food. We have predation, so just kind of a common example, a predator or prey. And we have symbiosis. So you may know from Finding Nemo, the clownfish and the sea anemone. The clownfish gets safety from the sea anemone because it doesn't sting it, so it gets safety from other predators. And to the right, we have what are wasp larvae and a caterpillar. So basically the wasp stings, or an adult wasp stings the caterpillar and lays its eggs inside, and those larvae or eggs gain nourishment from eating the inside of the caterpillar until they eventually break out. So it doesn't bode well for the caterpillar, as you can clearly see, but it's another example of just symbiosis where 2 species live near each other. In this case, one does not do very well. So in this example, or this video, we're going to look at an example of competition again, where you might not really expect it.
In tropical forests, it's never winter, and the trees are in leaf throughout the year. If a plant sitting on the ground beneath such a permanent canopy as this needs sunshine, it will have to climb to get it. These youngsters search for some kind of ladder by lashing around with their whip-like tendrils. Once one of them gets a grip, it puts a coil in the tendril, so shortening it and pulling itself closer to the branch up which it might climb. Other plants ascend by twining their main stem around their support. As a climber gets nearer the canopy and the light, it expands its leaves. There are no more determined competitors in this upward scramble than the rattans that live in the forests of Southeast Asia and tropical Australia. A mature rattan produces the longest stem of any plant. One has been measured at 560 feet. The mature plant doesn't develop leaves on its stem down here on the forest floor. It only does that up in the canopy. This luxuriant growth, basking in the full sunshine 200 feet above the ground, is the crown of the rattan, and it makes the plant's character quite plain. It's a kind of palm. The tendrils with which it climbs are so thin they are easily overlooked. But snag one of these on your arm and it will rip your clothes and your flesh. The tendrils are rigid enough to reach up and hook onto the branches of established trees. They then hold the stouter, heavier main stem in position while it grows upwards from the fearsomely protected bud at its tip.
So again, that was some competition for, actually it's a look at the abiotic and biotic factors, because the plants are competing to get an abiotic factor or sunlight. So they're competing by trying to reach that sunlight. So again, plants need sunlight to produce energy. We talked about that with photosynthesis. So there's only a limited amount of sunlight available when you have tons of species, especially in a rainforest. So this one plant has adapted or has found a way to compete by climbing on other plants so that it can get its leaves into the sunlight. So we're going to look at carrying capacity now, and this still ties in with everything that we've looked at. As the population grows, it requires more food, water, and space. And at some point, the population reaches the maximum number of organisms that it can continuously support. So basically, it's going to reach a number where it can continuously thrive based on how much food, water, and space is available. So the carrying capacity is basically that maximum population size of a species that an ecosystem can sustain. So we can see an example here of our number of rabbits. So our rabbit population is represented by the solid line. So over time it starts to increase, and then we eventually hit a point or an imaginary line, which is the carrying capacity, where it kind of maxes out at. So basically this is that maximum population size or the maximum number of rabbits that the ecosystem can sustain. Again, based on, the resources available. So a population growth curve is basically what we just looked at. We're just going to break down what each kind of segment of that growth curve represents. So A, down here at the bottom, a region of small growth or small growth population, basically small number of organisms that are adjusting to a new environment or just starting to grow. So there's a small growth rate. B, a region of rapid population growth. So we can see by the increased line or the very steep line that we have an increasing in numbers. So basically the organisms are ready to reproduce. And finally C, a region of steady population growth. Basically the carrying capacity, you can see by this red line here, has been reached. So the growth rate starts to decrease and starts to level out because we've hit that maximum number that we can reach. So again, K represents the population growth or the carrying capacity here. So the carrying capacity can be altered through natural or human activity. So for example, a forest fire can increase the number of blueberry bushes since more light and space is available. So all the large trees have been burned down. So blueberry bushes on the ground will have access to more light, especially while the trees are still growing. They're going to have equal space to fight for that light. Irrigation, so basically adding water, which increases the productivity and fertility of land. So we could irrigate a desert with enough water to hopefully create a kind of like a lush oasis, and you kind of can see those, your standard mirage in the desert where you can see this like lush greenery just in the middle of sand. And finally, kind of another example, the removal of wolves by human hunters can cause an increase in the deer population since there are fewer predators. This could also be done in kind of the opposite way. If human interaction or human activity causes there to be fewer prey, such as maybe overfishing, then we could see a decrease in the predator population. So finally, for an ecosystem to be sustainable, none of the populations can exceed the carrying capacity for very long. Right? We saw this in the food chain gizmo. If the population is too high, then it's going to reduce or decrease all the other resources to a point where it cannot exceed at that level, and it's going to start to decrease until we get down to that carrying capacity. So again, kind of the main things here are just looking at different ways that our population size can be affected, whether it's the type of population, the different factors of population growth, and our abiotic and biotic limiting factors.